So, hi everyone. We are now live for an interview with Isvari Mohan and yeah, we're running a little bit late at the moment because the last masterclass overran slightly, but we are here now. So, yeah,
So glad,
welcome, Isvari.
so
Would
glad to be
you,
here. Thanks for having me.
yeah, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. So I'm Ishri. I am a writer. I write with my co-authors now. We do a lot of YA contemporary thrillers, fantasy, that sort of thing. We probably are also going to branch into adult work, but so far it has been YA. Yeah, I really like writing about diverse characters and diverse settings. I wrote on my own in the past and wrote thrillers. Yeah, I'm a columnist. So I used to write for the Boston Globe and the Washington Times. I now do a lot of writing on Medium, which I think is a super cool place to write. And I get to write about a lot of different topics there. So I do a lot of politics and personal stories and that sort of thing. I really, really love writing. And in my day job, I am the president of Dweebs Global, which is a large international nonprofit. So I'm really, really happy to be here. Writing is just, it's such a great community, and it's so nice to talk to all of you.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. And yeah, you're always so busy. Like, it just amazes me how many different things you work on. Because I know that we originally met through Medium when I can't remember who reached out to who, but I know there was one like article or something about something to do with writing, and yeah, we just started emailing about it. So that was really cool. And yeah, you're just so busy all the time. I don't know how you find all the time to work on your novels as well, because it just astounds me. I'm always seeing all these new articles on Medium that you've written, and yeah, because they get emailed to me because I follow you on that, and it's just yeah, I'm just like amazed.
Sorry for spamming your inbox.
So yeah, like in terms of novels, what are you working on at the moment?
Yeah, so my co-authors and my co-authors are Nathan Maranwe and Isvari Mohan, and we are working on a sort of book that is inspired by a lot of con TV shows, like con artist TV shows, but it's a YA book, and it is, typically set in a very, very rich private school where there are these group of kids who sort of con just for fun because they're very rich. They clearly don't need the money, but they're bored. And there's a new kid who sort of comes from a much, much less privileged background who does it because he needs the money, and also just that he does it for different reasons. And so it is our first book that doesn't really touch on socio-political issues. It's just fun. It's lighthearted, but I really love that the rich kids are all extremely diverse, and the person who comes from more of an underprivileged background is actually white, because that's something that I don't see a lot of. It's always like the minority kid is struggling or is an immigrant or is poor. But in California today, where the book is set, there are so many wealthy people of color who whose parents are just incredibly rich, whether their parents are sports stars or actors or business leaders. So it really is focusing on that part of the community. And despite the fact they're really wealthy, they do face racism and they do face a lot of discrimination, but the book is not about that. It's sort of just about, well, it's okay, we'll just con people. And I'm having a lot of fun writing that. It is almost done. I would say that it is also sort of a romance, and it is queer. So which I love. I'm queer, and I think that there needs to be more like just happy, lighthearted queer romances out there. So yeah, it's been a really, really fun book to write compared to some of the more serious things we've written before. So it was really enjoyable.
It sounds great, and yeah, I can't wait to find out more about it. I'm also quite intrigued about your writing process because you've mentioned you've got two co-writers who you write with. Like, what is that sort of process like? Like, how does it work when there's three of you?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And it's something that I feel like we change with every single book. The first book we wrote was very, very carefully planned out, where we talked about the scenes in advance, and everything was, this is exactly what's happening in this chapter. In fact, we could and did write chapters out of order because we were like, this is exactly what's happening in this chapter, and this is exactly what's happening here. And I think we then sort of restructured it later and did a whole bunch of editing to like seamlessly stitch the book together. But it was very, very planned, sort of Kayla Ancrum style. That's like my style too. I really, really like planning everything. But Jenny really doesn't like planning books because it sort of takes away the fun, and she likes to do a chapter and then the next person does a chapter and there's less planning. So we wrote a book that is actually about sort of the pandemic and things like that. We wrote it during the early days of the pandemic, and that book we did sort of chapter by chapter, and we alternated, and there were 3 viewpoint characters, so it was really easy because there are 3 of us and we each just wrote 1 viewpoint character. And then for this book, there is sort of only 1 viewpoint character, except that there are these sort of emails back and forth between them. So that can sort of be another viewpoint character or different people writing those emails and those texts back and forth. But there really is 1 viewpoint character. And for this book, we did a mix, sort of. So we planned things, but it wasn't super planned. We talked a lot about where we were going, but we let the story go where it wanted to go as well. And, you know, we wrote the same character. So I actually have another friend, Larry Bond, who also writes, who's always written with co-authors, and his books are very seamless and they don't necessarily have different voices. And so I was hearing him talk about how he sort of just, you know, you write it and then you have the other person edit it and do that. And I think that works really well. So far for this book, I've sort of been doing a lot of like voice editing and making sure, but we also spend a lot of time on voice. So we will create an entire document or an entire Excel spreadsheet where we're just talking about voice, how they observe, how a character observes the world, what language they use, what jargon they use, even what type of English they speak. Because with a lot of immigrant families, right, there's a lot of using language that comes from your background. I have been told I speak like weirdly. And so we just make sure that we're using the same sayings and things like that.
Yeah, because like continuity of style was one thing that I was wondering about, like how you would achieve that with 3 different writers. But yeah, I'm also wondering, do you ever sort of disagree on the direction to take a manuscript in? I suppose this would be sort of at the planning stage if you're sort of trying to work out a typical 3-act structure or something. Are there any sort of challenges within that where like one of you wants to take it a certain way but the others don't?
Yeah, I feel like, so since there are 3 of us, it just doesn't happen because we just vote on everything. And so if 2 people vote one way and the third person's like, no, we just go with what 2 people think. I have no idea how it would work if there were 2 of us or 4 of us. I feel like maybe we would fight a lot more. But yeah, so it's just,
yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, so 3 does seem to be sort of like the magic number really in terms of co-writers, because yeah, like I've never co-written anything before, so it's like a whole new process for me.
But you've done anthologies with other.
Yeah, it does. Well, yeah, that is true. Yeah, like I don't know, I kind of think of it as very different because I suppose when I'm doing an anthology, it's very sort of like distinct individual stories rather than sort of stories that put together to tell something bigger. So yeah, like how did you get started co-writing, by the way? Like who suggested it and who sort of like the driving force behind it originally?
Yeah, this is it's such an ironic answer now, given we literally have no independent identities. So a nonprofit that we run, I mean, I run with them. We're sort of running the nonprofit. That's our day job. So we literally work together, and then we have this. We write novels together as well, and we share an agent. And so it's like now we have no independent lives. But at the time we started writing, I felt like, you know, I'm a very clingy person, so I will take some responsibility for this. I was like, I'm not spending enough time with my family. Nathan is my husband, Jenny's my sister. So it's like, no, really, it's really bad. But I was like, we should do something fun together. And I had been writing a ton, and I love writing. I think if the world were perfect and I sort of didn't feel a responsibility to like work on fixing it, I would have definitely been a writer, not an attorney. I'm sort of an attorney by trade. And I never like sort of really fell in love with it the same way that I did with writing. And so I was like, this is so fun. We can take our time. We can write a chapter each. It can just be something we do for fun, except that I knew going into it, I'm really intense, and I was always going to treat it like a job from the get-go. But we were like, oh no, this will be fun. Let's do this. And then we sort of wrote the first book, and then like when we were looking for an agent for the first book and stuff, it was sort of, we all worked really, really hard on it, but I sort of did a lot of the agent thing because I was like, we really should make this serious and that would be really cool. But during this process, Dweebs Global became a thing, and now they're literally in the same house. They're working on other things I also work on. It's a little bit like we're all in each other's pockets all the time. So reasoning doesn't apply anymore. I think we just write now because we love it and because we consider ourselves professionals and like this is our job now. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, the three of you write as Isvari Mohan, and yeah, the recent anthology called Unbound, which was one that I was a co-editor on, did include one of your stories. So yeah, like it's amazing reading your story because it is just so smooth with the style, and to think that there are actually three different writers behind it, like that's what really struck me when I was just reading sort of like your first draft, especially because yeah, like I would never have guessed it was sort of like co-written, because when I've read co-written books before, it has been where each author will have their own point of view character. But yeah, with your short story, it's so seamless and it works really, really well. So I'm really interested to know what the three of you write sort of in the future. And this book that you're working on that you've mentioned, like that sounds really, really fantastic. And I just can't wait for that.
Thank you.
But yeah, you mentioned that you recently signed with an agent. So I'd love to know a bit about what your process of querying was like, and then what the actual process of signing with the agent was like as well.
Yeah. Well, couldn't have done it without amazing people, specifically you. So throughout the whole process, bugging you like a million times. So I really, really appreciate it, because I think that authors who are more senior in the field and have had agents for longer looking to you for advice was incredible. And I think it's like the biggest tip that I have out there for people who are still in the query trenches, is find someone who's done it and, bug them until they help you or something. But it's very, very helpful. And I'm so grateful for that. So yeah, we were querying for a while. I think that for us, one of the hardest parts of querying was just at the time, I feel like towards the end of it, I feel like we were having a lot of conversations about diversity, and that was great. Towards the beginning of it, we definitely got a lot of people who were what I think now would be considered super racist, but at the time just seemed sort of normal. So that was really difficult for me, because I sort of wrote to avoid that, because I was at the time a national security attorney and was working with the National Commission on Service. And it just, being in DC in a very white field, in a very male field, it just felt like this was sort of my escape. And so that was a difficult part of the querying process for me. And partly because of that, when I think you told me about DV Pit, or someone told me about DV Pit, it was a huge thing on Twitter, and I queried, and I think that was the first time when I felt like, oh, we do have a story worth telling. I remember we got like, I don't know, maybe like 40 agents or 45 agents who liked the pitch on DV Pit, and then we queried all of them. And yeah, so we ended up getting like, we were super, super lucky. We got like, I think 30 plus full reads. It was really incredible. It was very, very exciting. And we got a lot of feedback or R&Rs that we didn't necessarily agree with, but we were very amenable to changing, because we're like, okay, we'll just get an agent. But we were so, so lucky when we found Jessica Reno is our agent now at Metamorphosis, and she's the sweetest human being. She, really had a vision that very much matched her book. And I remember getting on the call with her, because she had edits that we totally were like, yeah, this makes total sense. And we edited it. And we got on the call with her, and I remember being on that call and being like, oh, I definitely want to go with this person. But we were doing the professional thing of like, okay, can we have 2 weeks? Can we get back to other agents? But she was just so incredible, and like her vision for the book and for the story we were trying to tell. And this was Yet We Shine So was the first book that we wrote together. Her vision was just really on point, and really just what we wanted to do, because that's such a social justice book. It's a book we really want to get out there for like political reasons in the United States more than our careers even. It's something we really care about. It's about criminal justice reform, and it's about a lot of issues in America that exist right now, race and justice and things like that. And so we really, really want to get it out there for those reasons. And so we were very lucky to find someone who sort of agrees with that. So it was a lot of hard work. We were in the trenches for a while. We definitely revised the book and the query a ton of times. But we had a really solid hook, I guess, for this book. I found it easier to query than towards the tail end. We started querying the second book we'd written, but we ended up stopping because we got an agent. But I found it a lot easier to query this book just because there was such an obvious thing to talk about, not to spoil the book. So there was such an obvious plot twist that really sold the book. And so that's, I think, why we got so much interest in that book.
Yeah, because I remember I beta read Yet We Shine, and you're right, it's such like a timely book for this sort of time that we're in now. And yeah, I'm just a massive fan of that book. So yeah, well, I'm a massive fan of pretty much everything that you write because you're just amazing.
Oh,
So,
thank you. Likewise. I look up to you so much. So I mean, I'm so glad that you're in my life.
Yeah, because like we are critique partners now, and like we trade manuscripts a lot. And yeah, it's always so useful just finding someone that like not only that you're friends with, but that can sort of read your work, give feedback, and the accountability of it too is just so helpful. Because if I wasn't thinking, oh, I've got to send a new chapter over to like one of my critique partners, or I'm gonna send like the full manuscript by like 6 weeks or something, I just probably wouldn't have the motivation to actually make sure I finished the manuscript, because if I start so many and I never finish them, I just put them aside. And yeah, having the accountability of other writers in a really like strong writing community, a group that you can regularly share your work with and that you trust the writers in it, is just really vital. So yeah, I'm so happy that we're critique partners now. Because
yeah, me too. Your thrillers are so exciting. So it's painful to be a critique partner for you chapter by chapter. I remember when we were doing that with a couple books, I was like, oh no, I can't do this, because I'm such an impatient reader. I even don't watch Netflix shows until they're all out because I need to binge. So to do it chapter by chapter, it's so hard when you're such a good writer and you're like, oh, I really want to know what happens. And so then you sort of nag the other authors like, the chapter, please.
yeah, definitely. But yeah, you mentioned DV Pit because you got your agent through that, and I actually got my agent through that as well. So I signed with Erin Clyburn a couple of years ago when I was switching agents, and yeah, it's quite fun really that we both got our agents through the same Twitter pitching contest. Like for viewers who haven't heard about it, DV Pit is a Twitter pitching contest where diverse creators, that can be any sort of marginalized identity, so like all different ones, who are typically underrepresented in the industry, they can pitch on Twitter a full manuscript that they've finished. Like it has to be a complete one, because you will get agents and editors requesting to see materials, and you're supposed to send them in like pretty quickly. But yeah, pitching contests like that really help to amplify voices that are traditionally underheard and not represented that much within the publishing industry. So yeah, I was really delighted when I came across DV Pit, because I'm a disabled chronically ill writer. So it gave me a lot of opportunities, and well, that's also why I did like YA ThrillerCon and made it 100% online, because there's a lot of in-person events that like disabled writers are excluded from. So yeah, so like just like trying to think of these different opportunities and different ways to get these like underrepresented voices and underrepresented writers involved in things is just really important. So
yeah. YA ThrillerCon is so impressive, and I love your call to make it online, because it also can bring in people from all over the world. Like we were on a call with some people from South America and the Middle East, and I think that's so important. And then the other thing that I totally agree with you about online being more accessible, because it's also expensive to go in person. And for a lot of writers who don't have a day job or can't afford to do that, or just can't afford to take time off their day job or quit their day job to do that, and like that's so valuable. I'm so grateful to be a part of it, and I think it's so much more inclusive than like the traditional industry events. And I think it's so much more diverse too. Just look at your panels, just look at the content you're putting out there. It's just so diverse. And when I've been to industry events before in like any field, whether I've been to like industry events in like science and the law and writing, and they're all so like monochromatic, and like everybody is, and actually they're also very male heavy, which is in a lot of industries, which isn't great either. And then if you go in person as a woman, sometimes it can be very uncomfortable. So I think this is so inclusive and so valuable.
Thank you. Yeah, like I know with the pandemic, we've had a lot of events being moved online recently. And yeah, it was last year when all the writing events were suddenly going online, but I particularly realized how much more accessible it was for me. And I was really pleased that these online opportunities were coming up. But already sort of last year around like April, May, I was already seeing places saying, we're going to be online for this year only, and then we'll be back to normal. And it was just that sort of phrasing of back to normal that just kind of like got me a bit. And that's what really made me sort of decide to make this a yearly online event, because like you say, it is a lot more inclusive, like not just for people who are like disabled, chronically ill, but the people that can't afford to go to big panels, big cons, or people that don't live nearby to them as well. Because I'm in Devon in the UK, and there aren't really that many big conventions available sort of locally to me, because I've only really been to a couple of panels before, and they're always really local ones. So although that's great to have those opportunities, I do think like doing things online is a lot more accessible for a lot of people. So.
Yeah, it also sort of evens the playing field in many ways, like of course, for someone with disabilities as well, especially someone who might be able to keep it invisible online, but then it becomes obvious in person, or for people who like just I don't know, like just might not want to dress or act exactly the same way. Like it's just, you feel a lot safer online, and like a lot I know like I've seen so many colossal introverts, just introverts who struggle to do presentations, be able to give really powerful presentations, because you can get over stage fright. You're like in your room, you have your comfort zone, even if you're talking to 1,000 people, and so even that, which is such a simple thing, there's so many people who are introverts who have stage fright. I'd say it's probably the majority of people can give so much more authentic conversations and presentations online. So it's just, to me it makes sense for this to be normal, because I think the average person finds everybody has some story, and I think that this is just so much more inclusive for, I would say, most people even. So it's so weird, I think, that we like force everyone to go into this thing we've called the norm for so long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And yeah, you were just talking about presentations, and you actually did a fantastic presentation for us at YA Thrillercon yesterday on a masterclass on writing diverse characters and diverse stories, which I really loved. Like I made so many notes during your masterclass, because you have some really important information there. So if you're watching this interview live at the moment, or even sort of later on, I do definitely urge you to go back and watch that masterclass that Isvari ran. You'll be able to find it on our YouTube page for YA Thrillercon, so definitely check that one out. But yeah, anyway, sort of like, as this is YA Thrillercon, I feel that I should ask you some questions specifically about thrillers.
Yes.
So let's talk a bit about sort of writing craft, thrillers, suspense, tension. So what elements of suspense do you sort of normally strive to include in your books? Do you have any set ones that you sort of aim for with each one?
Yeah, I would say that something we all, the three of us, really, really love is like that plot twist. And I think why I love thrillers are my favorite genre to read and to write. And I think part of the reason why is just because they lend themselves so nicely to these huge plot twists, and they lend themselves to being creative with the bounds of reality. And I just love it. I would say after thrillers, I really like SFF, which is sort of similar thing going on. You get to bend the bounds of reality. You get to have these really cool plot twists. So I would say we talk about plot twists in advance, or we talk about like what is going to happen at the end of the book almost always. It was really different with We Shouldn't Even Be Here, which is sort of the novel we wrote about the pandemic, because we didn't know where the pandemic was going. And when we literally wrote it like as the pandemic was developing, and it was the weirdest thing to write, which, of course, we're just going to have to do a lot of editing before we, put it out there. But I think one of the weird things for us was pacing that, because it almost was like a thriller, which is weird because it was a sort of, I would think of it as one of our more quiet books. And but I remember thinking about it as sort of like, this is like a thriller in that there's this thing happening, you don't know where it's going to go, the characters are really affected by it. And you know, in some ways it's like it's not a thriller. I don't think it would be classified as a thriller, but it really feels like one. And I don't know whether it's like once a thriller author, always a thriller author or something. But I think for us, it's like that pacing. We really love fast pacing. We really love things happening. We write very, very strong characters where we are always really diving into character psyche and like really trying to explore who they are. But I am a huge fan of plot-driven books. So even books where we're writing characters, which I think a lot of people would be like, oh, this is really about character development, it's always like there's a lot of plot going on. I think if anything, we err on the side of maybe too much plot going on. There's so much going on in our books. And I think that comes from the thriller world as well. Like, I want there to be a lot going on. I want readers to be like, okay, this is like the real world. There's like 10 things, and adulting is hard, or even being a teenager, it's hard. And like, there's so many things going on, and I have to focus on all of those things. So I would say that for us, writing thrillers, there's like so much plotting in advance, and we try to get that plot twist. We try to foreshadow. Foreshadowing is probably something that we really, really love to do. So if it's possible to foreshadow, we foreshadow. Sometimes we write plot twists that literally come out of nowhere, and then we try not to foreshadow because it's really tempting to be like, oh, look at this thing you can notice on the second read, but we try to make it really come out of nowhere. But if it's not that type of plot twist, we're like so careful to go back in and to be like, here's this hint and here's this hint. And sort of the first thriller I wrote and published, Eyes of Mikra, like that is all foreshadowing. The entire book is like this colossal, you know, I was so careful when writing it, like every single thing, every single note, chapter, letter, like was all like, this is actually not what you think it is the whole time. And so I think that is sort of like our signature thing to do with thrillers, is really like pull the rug out. And as much as we can, as much as it's like this, as much as we can think, hey, how few books have had this plot twist, let's use that one.
Yeah, because I remember with your book that's set in a pandemic, I remember you were sending me the chapters sort of like one at a time to critique, and it was really kind of like eerie in a way when we were all living through that as well. And you're definitely right, it has got a very sort of like thriller vibe to it, and I think that's like a really good way to demonstrate that so many books that aren't classed as thrillers do have the same sort of elements that thrillers rely on. So you get like suspense and pacing, tension in so many different genres. And I think that's why thrillers are pretty like accessible to almost every reader, because if you're reading a thriller for the first time, there's going to be elements of it that you recognize from pretty much every other genre. It's very much interlinked, especially when a lot of thrillers are genre blends as well. And you were mentioning about sort of speculative fiction as well, and yeah, they do have a lot of the same elements. So yeah, I was just wondering, do you think that you can include too many sort of elements of a thriller in a non-thriller book, if that makes sense?
Yeah, honestly, I don't think so, but I have to give a little bit context here. I'm a very intense person, even in my real life. I take like every relationship and upgrade it. I really believe with writing, make every relationship like a romance and make every plot like a thriller. Basically really up the ante. Like, think about what types of books make you really, really invest in the plot, and then always write your plot like that, and what type of books really, really make you invest in the relationships, and then make every relationship like that. Because I think it is already hard to capture intense emotions in writing unless you're a very good writer. And so getting inspiration from the books that do it best, which are often from completely different genres depending on the element in your book, I find that really, really useful. So it might just be that for me, thrillers are sort of most of our works in progress, while like fall sort of in that genre, or or where that's how we plan the pacing and the plotting. And even if characters aren't in a romantic relationship, I always think the same way. I'm like, how do I get them to be really close to each other? How do I get them to really care about each other? How do you get to, evoke that feeling in the reader where you're so invested in their relationship? And so same thing with thrillers. I feel like thrillers are they're like romance for plot. They're where the plot creates that feeling in the reader and it really attaches the reader. And so I think that element is something that I struggle to see as well done outside of the thriller genre. I just don't. Sometimes even you'll read a really, really good SFF book in terms of world building and character development, but when it comes to caring about what's going to happen next, it's almost like, oh, anything could happen. It's fine. Like you sort of have this little space between you and the book. Whereas with the thriller, I really feel like you're really in the plot. You're like there, you're seeing it happen. And so I don't think there's too much of that sort of attitude and that sort of way of looking at a book that can go into a book that is not a thriller. I do think that it's possible to include like too many plot lines. So that's definitely something. I think if you have like a lot of things going on, it's probably important that some of them are quiet, at least during some parts of the book, so that the pacing goes up and down. I, being remarkably single-minded, usually follow thriller pacing. So even when I'm quiet, I'm like, well, this is where the quiet part of the thriller should be. So I'm not necessarily following my own advice, but I do think that I try to make sure not every plot is like this huge, fast-paced mystery, go, go, go all the time. And I actually think the con book we're writing right now is, it's more like a series of things and a series of adventures, and there isn't necessarily, we didn't try to build in that sort of high stakes, like terrified fear into this that we usually build into most of our other books, because it was meant to be sort of a lighthearted, happy, coming out of the pandemic, let's ignore the real world type of book.
Yeah, we need a lot of those books at the moment, really. But yeah, I liked what you were saying about how you've got to make your characters feel certain things. And because writing at the heart of pretty much every book is emotion. Like emotion is just so important to convey it. And you're totally right when you're saying that you've really got to believe in something as a writer and really feel it as you're writing it. Otherwise, how can you expect for readers to feel the same thing if you aren't already feeling it when you're writing it? And yeah, that is just so, so important. So I was wondering if you have any sort of specific advice or tips for new writers who are perhaps struggling with incorporating enough sort of strong emotion into their characters and who want to really sort of intensify that experience for readers.
Yeah, this is actually a really good question, because I feel like it's probably the biggest thing that I feel when I read new books is I think I feel like a lot of times that's what's the hardest struggle, is how do you get people to feel what you're writing? And I think you always try to put a little bit of yourself in your characters, so the closer you can feel, like you can empathize with them. I'm an empath. In a lot of ways, I excessively feel other people's emotions. Like it's something that I actually have to work on. I have to meditate. I do a lot of mental health work to like not be like that. So for me, it's a little bit easy to really, really feel like I'm in someone else's shoes and pour my heart out on paper and really get in the mood and feel like what's going on. But a lot of people are not like that. And I think that is great. There's so many different types of people in the world. So if you're a writer who likes more struggles to really feel like you're in someone else's shoes, I think reading a lot of books that are character driven and that are, like I said, romances, I honestly have learned I don't like romances. It's not my like favorite genre, but by reading good romances, because it's so character driven and it's so much about two people's relationships, I've learned so much about how to write other relationships in other books. Because I always know like, okay, dialing it up to 100, that is what it would look like. So now what do I need to do for this character? And the other really weird tip I have is I feel like I got a lot better at this after I took improv. So before the pandemic, and before Dweebs Global, one of the things that I sort of decided was, I should spend time with my family again. And I was like, Jenny and I should take an improv class together. It was her idea. And she was like, we should do this together. So we did improv, and I actually think it greatly improved both of our abilities to really write well, because you have to like practice portraying emotions really quickly, and then you have to like create the scale and really learn to dial it up. And so it's almost like practicing, what does a 0 look like, what does a 50 look like, what does a 100 look like. And I think practicing that outside and inside of writing can really, really help. And then also putting as much of yourself in your characters as you can, feeling your characters. Jenny wrote a character once where she was like, I didn't feel this character as much. And I think that showed, and we all had to go back and edit that a lot more. And then she was like, this other character, I feel like so much better about it. I feel like I really identify with this character. And so it was a lot easier to write. So I think that really helps too.
Yeah, that was really interesting about sort of the improv class, because I wouldn't have thought of that, but it totally makes sense, because when, as writers, we are creating characters and we really have to believe that they are real. So yeah, approaching it from a different angle can be so, so helpful. And yeah, it reminds me, actually, I was interviewing Johnny Sabat-Pratt yesterday, and she's an audiobook narrator. And one of the things that she was recommending for new narrators is to take acting classes, because it's all about learning how to become these new characters, but also learning how to sort of become them very quickly and know how they would react. Because like, definitely when I'm writing, my characters will do really unexpected things, and I need to be close enough to the characters that I know exactly how they'll react, so then I can stay in the moment of that scene, keep writing it without having to stop and think, well, actually, how would this main character react here? Because it's almost all got to be sort of immediate. You've really got to know who you're writing and innately know how they would react, because they're very real people too, writers. So yeah, I think if you're struggling a bit with that, maybe it could also be part that you don't know your characters as well as you think you might know. And I do find, because I don't really outline my books, like I know that you really do when you're co-writing, but yeah, I'm much more like, I think you said Janani didn't want to outline, and I'm like that. I just can't outline, because if I outline, I feel that I've already written it, and then I don't have any motivation to actually write it. So I have to be able to surprise myself, but I have to be able to surprise myself with things that still seem plausible to the story that I am trying to write. So it can be a bit of like a balancing act, really. But even though I don't outline or plan, I do get to know my characters before I start this draft. So I will know like all their backstory, and I'll know everything that leads up to the very starting point of the manuscript that I'm writing, but I won't know what is going to happen within the actual manuscript timeline. So yeah, I love talking about timelines and like multiple narrators and stuff. But yeah, we're coming up to the end of the interview now. So I was just wondering, perhaps to finish, do you have any more advice that you'd like to give to new writers, perhaps, because we touched on querying before, if you have any recommendations for things that they should include in the query letters, perhaps?
Yeah, no, this is such a great question. And I think it's sort of so important for all new writers. I think one of the first things I know you get told this a million times, and then everyone doesn't listen the first time, but don't query unfinished manuscripts, or like manuscripts that aren't heavily edited, that aren't betaed first. I didn't actually make that mistake this time, but when I was querying a lot earlier, when I was much younger, when I definitely made that mistake. I also think just don't write an unsellable first book and then try to sell it. And there are such good books out there that are just even if they're not unsellable, they're unagentable, or on like the traditional publisher process. So this was something I also learned the hard way. When I was 15 years old, I was writing a lot of military thrillers as a 15-year-old brown woman, and they were adult thrillers. This was never going to work. Especially back then. And it wasn't something that I learned for a long time. But then I also did other things. Like the reason I published Eyes of Mikra online was because it's not it's not a normal word count length. It's not written in a normal style, right? So I think one of my first big tips is write a book that is queryable first, and then once you get an agent, write what you want. So write something that's normal word count, that is something the industry is looking for, that is kind of traditional, not super out there, that sort of thing. And then after you do that, I think learning to write a really good query letter, there are incredible resources out there all over the web for this. I actually really like Query Shark, because you can read so many queries that people have written and how they've done. So yeah, you can just Google Query Shark. I think it's queryshark.blogspot.com. But so I think that has a lot of different query examples. I think getting other writers to edit your query, I think queries are almost often too long. Query writing is like something I actually really like doing and I'm decently good at. So I found it really fun to write queries and to help a lot of people with queries, but I definitely think it's a challenge. And I see a lot of queries that are so long the first time around, and I think that's the biggest mistake. So writing short queries, learning to really write that book jacket, coming up with a really catchy title. So I think that also really helps. Like one earlier book that I queried that I ended up shelving because again, it wasn't in the proper genre. Like it was a genre bender and it wasn't way over count. And it was new adult back when there was no market for new adult. But the title of the book was like The 7 Ways to Live Life. And I remember so many agents wrote back to me and were like, I love the title of that book. And after that, I became a lot more serious about figuring out titles, at least for query. So it was like really catchy. And so they see it in like the header and it looks really catchy. So I'm sort of giving the weird tips because I think the normal tips are super out there. Do a ton of research. There's so many resources out there for query letters and query editing. Dweebs Global actually has one, dweebsglobal.org/contact, and we edit query letters for free. It's not the main thing we do, but we also do that. And there's some really, really great authors out there who are willing to help edit query letters. And then there's Amanda Woody on Twitter who does a lot of free query edits for marginalized authors. So I would check her out too. I would just really, really check out as many places as possible. I actually think if you're going to like pay for a query letter edit or your first so many pages of edits, to still get that recommendation from within your network, because my co-authors and I paid for a query letter edit once, or maybe like we were just curious at the time and we were like, oh, doesn't seem like that expensive. But we actually didn't get great advice. And I think that if you have someone who's just popping into your story and who doesn't necessarily know what you're trying to achieve with your query letter, they may not be able to actually help you the best. So going to your critique partners to help with that query is often far more valuable than necessarily paying for an industry executive anyway. So, because they read your book, they know like what it is that really drew them to the book that's going to sell your book. So I think that is another thing. And then once you have a query letter, I feel like people often ask about stats, and a lot of people don't talk about stats. So if you have a query letter and you've sent it out to like 10 agents and you haven't gotten a single read request, you probably need to revise your query letter. And then if you have a lot of read requests and you're not getting offers, it could be that the market is just not open to what you've written. It could be, as was the case early on for us, that like a lot of editors at the time were still looking for traditional voices. And, you know, if you're writing as a minority, if you're writing something a little bit different, it can be hard. But it could also just be that this isn't a debut novel, and a debut novel is its own, I think, special thing. And so learning more about what debuts look like, reading authors' first novels, and not like, hey, this novel really comps well to like these 5 authors' 5th novels. Well, there's probably a reason they were their 5th novels. So I think looking at debuts as comps is also really helpful. Yeah, so those were like just a hodgepodge bag of tips for querying. And I think there are so many wonderful, valuable resources out there that'll sort of really guide you through writing that letter. And then hopefully you get offers or full reads. And if you get a revise and submit, think about them in great detail. You don't need to revise everything if it doesn't match your vision, and keep trying, because oh my God, it is a numbers game. I feel like all my friends have queried hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of agents. I have a friend who queried over 1,000 agents before they got their agent. So just keep trying. I read this article where getting an agent is literally less likely than winning a lottery. It is like they like calculated some stats and they were like, it's like 1 in 6,000. You're gonna like get an agent. It's really, really hard. So it doesn't mean that you're a bad author. It doesn't mean that you don't have something sellable. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. It is often these really fickle, subjective things. It doesn't even mean anyone's wrong along the way or anyone's being discriminatory along the way. It can be, but sometimes it's just fluke. So don't overthink it. Keep trying, and good luck.
Yeah, like perseverance really is key with this, especially how like the wait times just to get a response to queries can be sort of up to a year or more. So it really is just a question of waiting and keeping writing as well, like work on your next book. And yeah, I just wanted to say as well, because in the masterclass with Kayla Ankrum yesterday, in the sort of Q&A part at the end, Kayla and I were actually talking a lot about querying as well. And Isvari, I liked what you said about making sure you're writing a novel that is queryable, because that's exactly what Kayla was saying as well. She was saying think of it as a product rather than a piece of art. Like, you can write it as if it's a piece of art to you, and it probably will be, but she said when you're querying it, you need to think of it as a product. You need to think where it's going to sit in the market, because publishers, they're going to need to know that it's whatever they're offering on will have some degree of commercial success. So yeah, it's like you can be really close to what you've written, and it can be like the book of your heart, but you've got to be able to sort of view it almost objectively as well when you're querying it, in order to work out the best possible angle to take when querying. So yeah, like if you're watching this and you want to know more, I definitely recommend watching Kayla's masterclass that she did with us yesterday, because we talked for about 15-20 minutes at the end all about that, and she actually read out the first sentence of one of her books when she was querying it, and she used that example and was really talking through her whole querying process. So
Yeah, no, that sounds incredible. Kayla has incredible query tips. I think
yeah.
she just does. That's incredible. And then I feel like I often get asked as well, like halfway through the querying process, is it worth it? And I hate saying this because, trust me, when I was on the other end, I didn't want to hear this either, but it is just so worth it. The industry is still so closed. It is still so friggin' important to have an agent. So there's nothing wrong with self-publishing. I have huge friends who make so much money self-publishing, but it is so much work. And also they all are sort of in niche markets, right? So like their niche market stuff, they'll self-publish. And even if you are self-publishing, this is the really sad part, right? The people with agents do better. So even if you're not going for a traditional publisher, I really, really recommend an agent. Ever since having Jess, I feel like there's this whole weight off my shoulders. Like, we're pitching to publishers, but I don't have to worry about it, and I can just sit back and relax. So I definitely think it's worth it. And then totally what you were mentioning about during the process, just keep persevering and keep writing. I have really, like, there are so many apps out there, Smiling Mind, Calm, like meditation apps. And I feel like that's one of the biggest querying tips out there, is to like use them and to do a little gratitude journal and to appreciate what it is that you already have in your writing career, and to not compare yourself to other people, and to find a community that isn't going to, like, if you are the type of person where seeing other people's success doesn't make you happy, then don't look at it. That's totally fine. Like, do what it takes to protect you. For me, I found it really optimistic and really inspiring to see other authors, especially other minority authors, succeed. So I was very active on Twitter during those months, even though I'm usually not. And I was very active on like seeing other people's successes, because it made me feel like it was possible for me. But know yourself. If that doesn't work for you, if that makes you jealous or unhappy, then just turn it off, because you don't have emotional bandwidth. It's a really rough process. So yeah, meditation, gratitude journals, things like that help a lot.
Yeah, that's really important, and it's especially like this sort of self-care things that you can do to really help as well. So yeah, anyway, we're sort of really at the end of the time now. This has been a wonderful interview with you, Isri, so thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate being here.
Thank you.